Hi everybody. Today we are going to start solving quadratics by factoring. I do want to go over a quick refresher on factoring when a equals 1. So this was the kind of beginning of factoring that we did about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. So this should be a review. And then the next sheet that I go over will be the new extension onto this, okay? So first, if we look here, we have x squared plus 6x plus 8. We have an a of 1, which a is always going to be 1 for this first section. B is 6, and C is 8. We are looking for two numbers that multiply to equal 8 and add or subtract to equal 6. Okay, those are the two numbers we're looking for. And remember, we would put an x in each parenthesis, and then our numbers we'd put here. Okay, so excuse me, numbers that multiply to be 8 would be 8 and 1, 4 and 2. 8 and 1 would add to be 9, not 6. 4 and 2 would add to be 6, so that's good. So we can put plus 4, plus 2. We have factored this. Okay. Now here, we want to find factors of C, so 6, that add to be negative 5. So 6 and 1, 3 and 2. 6 and 1, and obviously this is negative, so something has to be negative here. But if I make just one of these negative, negative 6 times 1, negative 3 times 2, that gives me a negative 6. So that would not work. In order for us to get a positive 6, these both have to be negative, because a negative times a negative equals a positive. So if you look at this one, negative 3 plus negative 2, that does give us negative 5. So those would be our factors. Negative 3 and negative 2 add to be negative 5. They multiply to equal 6. Okay. Here, I want to find factors of negative 12. Now, since it's a negative, that means one of these numbers has to be negative. The other is going to be positive. So I'm going to do 6 and 2. I'll switch them around to do that. I could also do 12 and 1. I could also switch those around. So I could also do 3 and 4. And I could also switch those around. So these are some different options I have for factor pairs. So negative 6 plus 2, that does give me negative 4, so that actually works right away. Negative 6 plus 2 equals negative 4. Negative 6 times 2 gives me negative 12, so we have factored. Okay, now let's amp it up a little bit, and now we're going to actually solve equations, solve quadratics by factoring. What we do when we solve quadratics is we find the zeros. Other names for zeros are roots, solutions, x-intercepts, okay? So all of those mean the same thing. We're finding the solutions here, finding the zeros, finding the x-intercepts. So the most important thing when you're solving, so we're going to factor just like we have been, but we're adding in the fact there's an equal sign and a number. The easiest one is actually this one here, number 3, because you'll notice that it's set equal to 0. Your goal in all of these, before you do anything, is to always make sure it's equal to 0 before you start factoring, okay? So this one's equal to 0, so I can go ahead and factor this sucker. Okay, so my C value is negative 18. So what are some numbers that multiply to get me negative 18? 6 and 3. So I can make the 6 negative, or I can make the 3 negative because I want this negative 18. If I do negative 6 plus 3, I get negative 3. If I do negative 3 plus 6, I'm going to get a positive 3, which is exactly what I want because my B value is a 3. So now I have x and x. Minus 3 plus 6 are my factors I chose. Now this is where things get a little tricky. I'm now going to take this and I'm going to solve. So I'm going to take each parenthesis, set it equal to 0, and solve for an x value. So here, this is a simple equation. All I do to this is subtract 6, so I get x equals -6. Okay, that's one of my roots, one of my solutions, one of my zeros. Okay, here I'm going to simple solution, add 3, x equals 3. This is another one of my roots, my zeros. Okay, so the most important thing is make sure it's equal to 0 at first. Factor it like we always do. Then take each parenthesis, each factor pair, set them equal to 0, and solve for your root, your 0, your solution. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 more examples now that aren't equal to 0, so it's going to be a little extra of a first step. So starting with number 1, I want this to equal 0. There's a -5 here, so I'm going to take this -5 and move it over here. The only thing I have to do the opposite is, so I'm going to add 5. But the only thing I can do to that plus 5 is add it to the 19. Because I have x squared minus 11x. Those are not like terms with that 5. Okay? There's no x attached to that 5. That means I have no variable. It cannot possibly be a like term with either of these terms. Okay? So it can only be added to this 19. That's going to give me x squared minus 11x plus 24 equals 0. Now that I'm equal to 0, I can start to factor. So I'm finding factors of 24 that could add to -11. That makes me know both of these are going to have to be negative. So I know 12 and 2 could do that. I know 4 and 6 could do that. Okay. I know 8 and 3 can multiply to be 24. So just off of this now, I can see -12 and -2. That gives me -14. This gives me -10. And this gives me -11. I was looking for it to add to -11. So that means these are my 2 factors. So I have x minus 8, x minus 3. Last step here to solve, because the difference here is we're no longer just factoring, we're solving. Last step is to take each parenthesis and set them equal to 0. I'm just going to do it up here where I have a little more room. So this one now I'm going to add 8. So one of my x's is equal to 8. Okay, so I did this parenthesis. Now I'm going to move to this parenthesis. If I add 3 to both sides, I get that x is 3. So I just set each of those parentheses equal to 0 and then solved them just like a simple equation, opposite operation. Last one here, it's not equal to 0, so I first got to get it equal to 0. I'm going to do that by adding 2 to both sides. It's going to give me a 24 again. So I know if 24 is here and the b value is negative, that means I have 2 negative numbers. And if you look back up at our factor pair over here, we actually kind of already have the answer. -4 and -6 multiply to be -10. I'm sorry, add to be -10, multiply to be 24. So my 2 factor pairs would be -4 and -6. X minus 4, x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now I'm going to split these up and set them equal to 0 on their own so that I can find my 2 solutions. If I add 4 to both sides, I get x equals 4. If I add 6 to both sides, I get x equals 6. These are my solutions. Okay, remember, solutions means if I go ahead and take a graph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that means this graph of this function is going to cross at 4 and 6. So it's going to look something like that. Okay, that is what the root, the solution means. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping up everything we've been learning into one. All right, please let me know if you have any questions. Office hours will be 11 to 12 today. Okay, have a great day.